So thank you very much to everyone who's joining us. This is Vanessa Purgarin. I coordinate the Cork Smart Gateway. The Cork Smart Gateway is an initiative established by the local authorities, Cork City Council, Cork County Council, and academia partners from University College Cork, Tyndall National Institute, and the Nimbus Research Centers from MTU. This webinar is actually held during in the framework of Local Enterprise Week. It's in a special occasion, and since we've been engaging with SMEs and bringing them different type of technologies and how these technologies can be used by them, now we're actually touching this the subject on the funding opportunities that they have. So now we're gonna have Brian Cahill as our moderator and introducing all the speakers here. Brian is actually from the Business and Research Development at the Nimbus Research Center. And I just want to thank you, and I should also highlight the opportunities of Enterprise Ireland bring for SMEs, like the innovation vouchers and the Enable Research Program as well. So having nothing further ado, welcome Brian, and thank you very much to everyone.
Thanks, Vanessa, and hello everybody. It's great to see such a large cohort online today. So I suppose we're going to touch off some very interesting projects, and I suppose a lot of us deal with industry and academia all the time, and always the big elephant in the room is funding. So we're going to address that head on. Initially, we're going to talk about two use cases. Nimbus Gateway, which is based in Nimbus Research Centre, Munster Technological University. Then we're going to Dirk, and he's going to talk about his experiences in relation to SFI funding, which is a very important aspect and it has a big impact to Irish industry annually. And finally, we'll touch base with Dr. Cian O'Murcú from Tyndall, who will actually talk a little bit more about the more EU-based flavoured funding. So it's with great pleasure then I introduce a colleague, Christian O'Leary from the Nimbus Gateway. Christian is senior researcher in artificial intelligence at the centre, working within the Nimbus software team, and has worked on applications involving computer vision, forecasting, anomaly detection, chatbot, sentiment analysis, and schedule optimization. And he's worked very closely with the owner of Cyberlink Security, who is Arthur Donkers from the Netherlands and based in West Cork. So Arthur started his career as an entrepreneur in the Netherlands, where he's built a cybersecurity penetration testing business. He formed Cyberlink Security Limited to develop a cybersecurity product to protect Internet of Things networks. So Arthur and the MTU are now exploring the next phase of turning their proof of concept into a commercial product. So Arthur, I just want to guide you through a few questions now, and we can bring in Christian as well, just to basically ask you a little bit about your company.
Yeah, sure.
And essentially what you aim to do.
Okay, well, thank you, Brian. Thank you for the opportunity. Yeah, real short. My wife and I moved over to West Cork late 2019, just before COVID broke loose. So good timing on our side, I think. And we, well, we still have a business in the Netherlands, and that is focusing on all things technical related to cybersecurity. And one of the main focus areas, main activities that we do is execute penetration testing just to see how secure it really is. So the proof is in eating the pudding, and you need to make sure that a hacker at least can get into your network, or you are capable of detecting a hacker trying to get into your network. So that's what I've done with the company in the Netherlands for a long time, say over 20 years. But we do see a pattern emerging. We did see a pattern emerging there. And especially for Internet of Things networks, it's almost like going back in time, really, security speaking. So there's a lot of stuff that we finally managed to get under control in our normal networks, and we forsake them more or less for IoT networks due to the time to market, limited capabilities, and even the sheer volume of IoT devices. So what I did is, when I came here to Ireland, I said, well, let's try to develop a product that can help organization, healthcare, banks, agricultural, to detect at least if somebody is trying to break into their IoT network. And after some good brainstorm sessions, we came to the conclusion that you can do that by analyzing the behavior of some of your network protocols. And if you say behavior analysis, you almost automatically come into machine learning and AI, the AI field. I think machine learning is a little bit more appropriate than AI. And we got in touch through the Ludgate Hub in Skibbereen with people from Nimbus, especially Christian, and we decided that we would like to, in cooperation with Nimbus, obviously, develop a technical proof of concept to see if the ideas that we developed are feasible and could work in practice. And while doing so, Nimbus did a lot of the development, and they helped us with applications for innovation vouchers at Enterprise Island, and we also leveraged the same grant application for the local enterprise office here in West Cork. So we managed to get funding to develop the technical proof of concept using Enterprise Island and the local enterprise office, and in cooperation with Nimbus. So that's how we did what we did last year. The technical proof of concept has been finished now, and it works. Luckily, maybe not luckily, but the idea that we had worked, and we are now trying to develop it into a commercial product again with Nimbus technology, and maybe do an agile innovation funding through Enterprise Island to fund part of the development into a first version of the commercial version of the product. So that's
is set up. What happens? What happens next? You could say when funding is in place, and how do you conduct your business to make a project successful?
Okay, so if the funding is in place, so we've put together an application, it gets approved, and we can proceed with the actual project planning. The first thing we need to do in that case is actually get some requirements from the client, so to identify what exactly is it they want. So if they want to develop something that's user facing, that often means engaging with the user experience team in workshops to try and define what exactly their needs are, what kind of user interface they might need. If it's for a non-user facing system, or usually for any system really, we also need to design a system architecture. So we need to outline what type of software we're going to design. Is this going to have an AI element? Are we going to need to interact with any gateways or any hardware? And we try to put together a project plan from there, trying to consider what teams will actually need to interact with. So for myself, I'm primarily in the software team, with one foot in the data science side as well. But we often have to integrate our projects in with the hardware teams, UX teams. It depends what's actually involved. So there is quite a large variety in the type of projects that we have because of the number of clients we get in. So some of them are new startups, or they might be international companies from, let's say, the USA. So it varies quite a lot. The type of projects we do, and where the project plan would need to go from there, it depends on the domain exactly. So if this needs to be, we'll say, hosted on their own server, then it's usually something that will set up a repository for code, start writing code, we'll start deploying their web application or whatever application it is they need, and iteratively build upon that foundation. So we usually build an application, reviews with the clients, see what they need, try to get another round of grant funding or investment funding from the client perspective, if that's what their plan is, and develop out the application from there.
It's tough, Christian, and like it's worth knowing. I know I'm just looking at the attendee list here. We've got members of the Rubicon Centre, and obviously we've got colleagues as well involved in UCC's Ignite Centre, and there's plenty of information out there for the entrepreneurs in our locality, in our community. And also when it comes to IP management, Arthur, did you get any advice at all from Nimbus in that process?
Yeah, I think it depends on what the end goal is that you try to achieve. The innovation vouchers and the feasibility studies, they are really easy because they don't claim any intellectual property, or they don't want you to share intellectual property. Once you continue, you need to make a decision for yourself. Do you want to keep the intellectual property for yourself, or are you willing to share it with Nimbus on the very reasonable conditions, obviously? And that depends. Well, that determines the way forward. We decided to go with the Agile Innovation grants because they are a little bit more favorable for us regarding intellectual property. But if you want to do bigger funding and you agree with Nimbus becoming the intellectual property owner for the time that the whole development is going on, that could be to your benefit as well. It all depends on what you want to achieve, but because our end goal would be to build a product that another company can integrate into their own solution, we decided to stick with the intellectual property at our end and keep it like this. But if we didn't have that end goal in mind, we could have gone for the innovation grant and then really give the people from Nimbus the sole property of the intellectual property, and then we can resell it and use. So that, again, it depends on what your end goal is and what you want to achieve with your product, really.
Yeah, that's great. Excellent stuff. Look, guys, thanks very much for your contribution today. That was excellent.
Thank you.
Thanks, Christian, too, as well. Now, what I want to do now is I want to bring in another use case. Again, not too dissimilar from the cybersecurity theme, but we're branching a little bit into the artificial intelligence area now, and the whole area of data analysis. So from a company that's actually operating through thick and thin, it has to be said, over the years, and surviving, and fair play to everybody involved. Ger Kyoan from Studio 49 and Dr. Conor Lynch from the Nimbus Research Centre will just talk a little bit about their experiences right now. But Ger is an e-commerce expert with over 15 years in the industry-grade web development experience. In 2006, Ger formed Studio 49, an award-winning team with a national and international reputation for excellence, specializing in system integration and omni-channel retail e-commerce. Studio 49 was the 2017 Supplier of the Year to the retail industry, awarded by Retail Excellence Ireland. Dr. Conor Lynch is a senior research engineer at the Nimbus Research Centre, Munster Technological University, with interests including system modeling, machine learning, data analytics, and artificial intelligence to optimally integrate and allocate renewable energy resources. He now leads the AI, machine learning, and data analytics team within Nimbus, with expertise in the aforementioned applied to forecasting, predictive maintenance, anomaly detection, sentiment analysis, natural language processing, pattern recognition, and data classification. So recently, the two got together and concluded and maybe continue to amend a project theme. So Ger, if I could actually ask you to maybe just describe a little about your company and the nature of the project that you leveraged funding for, the funding model adopted, and any slings and arrows encountered, that would be great.
Sure. Thanks, Brian, and thanks for having me. Studio 49 is an e-commerce agency, as you've pointed out, and we specialize in the integration of we'll say, for want of a better word, offline systems like EPOS and ERP systems, which nowadays technically aren't really offline, but we'll call them offline for the time being, and online platforms, in particular the e-commerce platform, but also sometimes CRMs for customer relationship management and things like that. So we were particularly interested in a project to work on what's called next product to recommend. So what that is to take the products that people typically buy together, or typically where they purchase one product and later on purchase a second product, and to try and identify when that happens, and to try and identify based on that information when we should suggest to a new customer that they might also be interested in the same product. So the kind of motivation for that is a lot of e-commerce businesses spend quite a bit of time on marketing and getting traffic onto the website, and pulling in people from Facebook or through email marketing and so on. And a lot of that is reasonably expensive. You pay for Google AdWords, you pay for Facebook advertising and so on. And once they get to the website, you've got maybe an approximately 1.5% chance that they'll actually convert into a customer. It's actually increased during COVID, but let's say in the traditional world of e-commerce, 1.5 to 2% chance that that person is going to convert into a customer. So if you're looking to improve your revenue online, you've only got three levers that you can work with. You can work with getting more people to the website, you can work with getting more of those people to convert, or you can work on increasing the average order value that the customer purchases, and then in a similar way, getting that customer to come back and purchase again. So the next product to recommend system is focused around trying to identify when a customer is interested in product A, which product B would they also like to buy at the same time, or which product C would they like to purchase 1 month later. So I suppose there have been attempts at this, and there are a number of AI-powered or machine learning-powered tools in the market. But to a large degree, those tools are entirely based on what happens online. So those are based on customers doing on the website, what they end up purchasing, so where they're clicking, and things like that. And they don't typically incorporate the information that is held on the EPOS. And what we wanted to do was we wanted to put the two together. So we wanted to come at it from an omni-channel perspective, take the so-called offline data about what customers are purchasing in store. So, which is actually, most of the time is 90% of the activity in the stores and so on. So we had that kind of a challenge. I suppose the upside was if we were able to figure out a way to handle this, we would be able to doing in the stores and use that information then to drive additional average order value sales on the website. So I'm going to forget the terms. So Connor is going to have to hop in at some point. But we got I'm not sure which one of the vouchers we got, but we got together with CIT. We realized that we didn't have the expertise in house to figure out how we would even approach this. We knew more or less what we wanted, and we were able to describe the problem, but we didn't know how to approach it. We got together with CIT. We were explained in a very simple fashion. I mean, the engagement was really, really straightforward. How we could apply, how to apply, and what what it meant once we had the voucher, and how the relationship would play out. And I suppose important things like IP and NDAs and so on. We were going to be working with customer information, so all of that had to be signed off and handled. So it was a really straightforward process. We went through 2 iterations. So we got 2 vouchers, so to speak. We worked with a team of, I think, 2 or 3 people originally, excluding the help that we got from Connor and 1 or 2 of his colleagues. So we sat down together and we worked through what the problems might be, what the solutions might be, and we had 2 people who worked with us to arrive at a kind of to work through the problem and arrive at a solution. We were even able to ask those team members to present on the problem at our own conference. We hold a conference on an annual basis. Those people who worked on this project with us presented to our customers on what they had done. And, you know, obviously this was very good from our reputation point of view. And then when we had arrived at a solution that we wanted to try out, we worked on the second iteration where we worked through, let's say, the framework or the scaffolding of how we would approach the problem, not necessarily, let's say, an actual solution that would necessarily work on the online in a live environment, but the indication of how we might actually do the work. After that, then it would be more or less up to us. So that was how we engaged. I'd say for anybody who hasn't tried it yet, it's really straightforward. We were, you know, taken by the hand through each of the parts, like the application process and, you know, the whole project management of it and the outcomes that we were looking for and so on. It was dealt with fairly transparently in that if we were asking for too much, it would be explained to us. And like the budget, because there is a budget, obviously, and the budget was, let's say, maximized so that we knew what we were getting and what our options were and what we could ask for, and then we were able to select, we'll say, what was important to us to get that inside the project. So yeah, that was our.
That's great. That's great, Ger. What I'd like to do now is actually bring in Conor. Conor, the secret to a really good project, right, is solid communication from all stakeholders, and we would have had it with interest with Studio 49. That's for sure. Definitely know what makes a good project. Could you talk and elaborate a little bit about how you managed this one and what was involved?
Yeah, so I think Joe, from this point of view, it was Joe Studio 49 engaged very much with us as well, as much as we were engaging with them. I think that's what makes a good project overall. I mean, we linked up with one or two of their in-house staff throughout the project as well, and like as for us to do our jobs, I suppose we need to know what it is exactly that a client actually wants. And for this particular project, that was very easy. So we've been good involvement from Ger and his colleague Kevin. I suppose just to pick up on one of the points that Ger mentioned in terms of like the funding streams that are available. I have one or two slides if I'm allowed to share them, if that's all right. Just maybe might set it out a bit clearer in terms of the avenues that people can explore. Is that all right, Brian?
Yeah, drive on there, right? Yeah, no problem. The general theme of funding so far has been vouchers anyway, and every company is entitled to 3 vouchers, 2 standard and 1 co-funded, or if you can take the hit, 3 co-funded vouchers. So it's kind of like 2 options there, and you have to leverage one before you actually start the next one. But yeah, Conor, if you want to talk about those, no problem. I can certainly go too.
It's clear for everyone, if everyone can see that.
Yeah, we can see it perfectly, yeah.
Let's try and get it a bit bigger, maybe. Might be make it better. Okay, so I suppose, number one, just before I delve into the funding, I might just take it back a small step, I suppose, in terms of what Nimbus do. So I suppose we kind of engage by and large, realizing our position as one of the tech gateways around Ireland. We kind of by and large, one of our functions is to, I suppose, to support SMEs and essentially kind of, bridge the gap between, academic knowledge and research and industry requirements. So I suppose generally speaking, like Ger would have done, they would approach us and with their idea or what it is they actually want to do. And some of the work that we would do with them would revolve around trying to, I suppose, help SMEs leverage some of the funding that's available from a myriad of different sources. So they include, Brian would have mentioned, the innovation vouchers from Enterprise Ireland. Equally, there's other funding avenues that people can explore from SEI, EPA, the Irish Research Council, SFI, which I think Dirk will go into a bit more detail later on. and the European, there's a lot of, I suppose, funding available as well through the European avenues, especially with the new Horizon Europe 2021-2027 that's been recently launched. So some of the work that we would do also in terms of prototype development. So that's would have also covered some of the work that we would have done with JER. So we would have done the initial prototype of the algorithm, and then we would have presented, I suppose, how the algorithm worked in the code itself to JER and his team. And then it's obviously their IP to do as they wish then to advance it forward. So we would have done some trialing and demonstration as well as part of that. And also some of the work that we would do is to help, I suppose, SME in terms of like commercializing their, I suppose, their ideas and helping them even to create new spin-out companies as well. So also in-house, I suppose, apart from helping SMEs, you know, we do act as a kind of research center as well. We do, I suppose, oversee a number of PhD programs and postdoctoral researchers. And as I said, we would also look at some larger scale or larger budget European level projects as well that would often span over 3 or 4 years. So these are the SFI centres, or the main SFI centres in Ireland. And as I said, Dirk will probably talk about these in a bit more detail. So they include Connect, Confirm, Adapt, Marry and Enable. So the different centres would each kind of have their own specialities in terms of what they cover and deal with. But from an SME or a business perspective, by and large, there's probably two, I suppose, key options of funding any project. And I suppose option one really is kind of like whereby it's part funded. So that would be whereby an SME would use some of their own funding, and they would also maybe leverage some Enterprise Ireland or EI funding and potentially or leave some Science Foundation or SFI Ireland funding. So typically, I suppose the range was from, I suppose, the vouchers, obviously nearly 100%, but typically speaking, kind of industry contributions would be kind of like between 40 and 60%, and you'd leverage between 20 and 80%, I suppose, parallel funding. Option two, then, I suppose, if you're really, I suppose, want to protect that IP, I suppose the straightforward way to go in terms of protecting IP is the direct funded option. Okay, so whereby an industry or SME would supply all the funding, and you're kind of 100% in control at that point. So in terms of the types of funding that's out there and how much, I suppose, in the kind of pot in each, I suppose the innovation vouchers, most companies can, by and large, there's two available. So there's 2 5K vouchers available. There's also a third option whereby you can do kind of a 50-50 voucher, whereby you supply 5 and EI would match that funding up to 5K as well. So essentially it's kind of, I suppose, from an SME's point of view, very easy to kind of leverage up to 20K in a relatively short point of time. And also the turnaround for some of these applications can be, sometimes it can be very quick, sometimes it can take a number of months. So I suppose that's the other, I suppose, advantage or key point about the EI voucher system. Often there's a very short turnaround from the point of view where we would do the application by and large, and the client's point of view, there's normally maybe 4 to 6 week turnaround between the time that we would do the application and we would receive the response from EI in terms of whether that funding is being awarded or not. Another one that's readily available really is the 9K IPP feasibility studies. So these can be used as well for SMEs to kind of explore, I suppose, maybe a new or novel idea that they wish to explore. So it's anything that's, I suppose, has some component of innovation within it. It's a nice, I suppose, program that SMEs can leverage, I suppose, through the gateway.
Sorry, Conor, I must interject now because we're smack bang on 2:30 actually, and we need to allow other speakers in. But I think that actual particular slide there is a very good overall view of what's available, and you know, it's an ever-changing landscape in fairness, and it's something that we would actually encourage industry to keep an eye on at all times. And if you have a development advisor, keep in touch with that development advisor. If you are involved with your in line of communication with your local enterprise office, please keep in contact with those individuals, because various funding streams are changing all the time, and especially in the COVID-19 landscape. There'll be encouragement from the government, I'm sure, over the next 12 months to support SMEs as we go forward. Conor, I have to say thanks very much for your contribution.
No problem. I can share these slides at the end, and if anybody has any questions, obviously feel free to drop me an email. No
that's fantastic. And maybe on another occasion, we'll actually get down to the bowels of artificial intelligence in a bit more detail, because I think we have the issue of a lot of industry approaching us looking for a bespoke AI solution when it's already there, done and dusted, ready to be utilized again. So maybe we'll talk about that on another occasion. The next speaker up today is Professor Dirk Pesch from the School of Computer Science in UCC. Dirk's going to spend some time talking about the SFI, Science Foundation Ireland funding landscape. As mentioned, Dirk's a professor in computer science and information technology at UCC and director of the SFI Centre for Research, Training in Advanced Networks for Sustainable Societies since 2019. His research is focused on principal technologies and applications of the Internet of Things and cyber-physical systems, particularly interested in the area of application technologies to smart and connected communities, smart manufacturing, and the built environment. His experience also includes being a principal investigator of research centres such as Connect and Confirm, and he held the position of head of the Nimbus Research Centre from 2009 to 2019. So Dirk, it's over to you.
Thank you very much, Brian, for the introduction, and there's apologies. I've done too much in my life. I fear that it takes long to introduce me these days. So I'd like to kind of talk specifically about SFI funding opportunities with industry, and So Science Foundation Ireland is the main research funder in Ireland. So while some of the other agencies like Enterprise Ireland, the Irish Research Council, for example, and so on, fund research, the bulk of the money comes from SFI. It funds oriented basic research and applied research, as they call it. Oriented, in this case, means that it's kind of oriented towards particular topics. And these topics are defined by the SFI remit, which is based on government legislation. And it covers topics in ICT, information communication technology, life science, and energy. But the specific topics that can be covered also are, to some extent, bounded by the 14 national research priority areas, and I'll talk about them in a moment. SFI has quite a large number of funding instruments. So they fund individually led research. This is researchers in universities, institutes of technologies, so on, who are leading the research, who are conducting research based on their own interest and expertise. It's challenge-based research where SFI defines a number of specific challenges. So there were challenges in terms of climate change, for example, healthcare, etc. And there have been a number of very high-profile calls of those in the last number of years. They support international research programs, so collaboration, for example, between the Ireland, the UK, Ireland, China, Ireland, and the US, for example. And they also support preparation of research funding applications to European funders, but that's kind of focused on individually led research there as well, rather than on industry research. They also have some small funding that supports education and public engagement focused activities. And then the big thing, which I'm going to talk about, is the industry partner research. And that's a very significant part of what SFI fund, although it comes at the end of the list, but is actually a very significant aspect. So if we look at, just to give you kind of a sense of, I mentioned ICT, life science, and energy as the topics, but as you may know, is the government has defined a number of research priority areas for Ireland. that are valid from 2018 to 2023. So we are right in the middle of this particular phase. And these areas are, and I list them here, they are in the ICT, health, well-being, food, energy, sustainability themes, manufacturing, services, and business process areas. But these 14 themes in the second column are effectively the application spaces in which SFI would fund ICT and life science and energy related research. So for example, the ICT research can be in any of those. So we might be looking at ICT for connected health, for example, or we might look at new diagnostics, for example, which comes from a life science perspective, or we might be looking at, for example, at energy reduction in communications and data centers, for example. So as you can see, as these things kind of are almost kind of hand in glove how they work together. But anything that is outside this scope is something that SFI may not fund. I'm not saying they won't, but it may not fund this. But to be honest, I've never come across an area where that couldn't be somehow included in those priority areas. So if we look at the particular industry partnered research funding that SFI offers, and some of this was mentioned already, the biggest part, I guess, is the SFI research centers, and I'll talk about that in a moment. Then there is the SFI Spoke program, strategic partnership program, the SFI Centers for Research Training, the Industry Fellowship Program, and the Public Service Fellowship. So if we look at those all in turn, so there's in total 17 SFI centers. So there's actually a few more than what Connor mentioned a moment ago. But he had all the nice logos. I must admit, I didn't dig out all the logos, but there's 17 centers spread over Ireland. The SFI centers are collaborations at national level with multiple higher education institutions involved, and typically a large number of academic investigators. And so they are multi-annual initiatives. Typically 6 years is a phase of those. Some of the centers now are have started their 4th phase, so they are basically been around for kind of the best part of nearly 2 decades. Some of the centers are much newer. They've only been around maybe for 3 or 4 years. But if you look at the titles of the centers, so they cover ICT research, they cover energy, they cover health aspects, they cover energy, for example, and so on. So all within the remit of the SFI funding legislation, basically. But anything, so if you can identify yourself somewhere around those topics. So for example, you might be, if you're in an agricultural space, for example, then the Vista Mill Center may be conducting research that's relevant to you. If you're in the health space, for example, then maybe Future Neuro or APC, the APC Microbiome Institute, for example, maybe in your area, or for example, the Irish Centre for Fetal Neonatal Translational Research. If you're into optical systems, then maybe the Irish Photonics Integration Research Centre. If you're into software engineering, LERO. Communications, for example, is the Connect Centre. So there is something there for most likely for most companies. And so these would be these centers, and they all have websites, so you can find contact details on the web. They all would be delighted to support Irish companies that need help with their innovation. So again, just this reiterates a little bit of what Connor has said already, is all the SFI centers work in partnership with industry. The funding that they have is split between so-called platform funding, which is for longer term research, PhD student training, for example. And then there is targeted project funding with industry collaboration. Typically, the funding is about 50% from industry, 50% SFI funding. So it's perhaps not quite as good as funding from Enterprise Ireland, but if you already had Enterprise Ireland funding, for example, and you may not be eligible for more funding through innovation partnerships or other means, then the SFI centres, while perhaps the share of industry contribution may be higher, may still offer you a good opportunity to engage. Also, because the SFI centres are multi-institutional initiatives, if you need expertise, for example, in terms of analytics, networking, IoT type aspects and so on, then most of the centers have expertise across this continuum, and that's the strengths, for example, rather than engaging, for example, with one single entity. Also, there are typically well, I wouldn't say there are no limits on the amount of funding, but the SFI centers are very significantly funded. So some of the industry projects can be quite large. They can be, in the order of €500,000 or above, if that suited a particular company. Okay, the other benefits, for example, that include here also access to an ecosystem for innovation and knowledge transfer. So the SFI centers don't only do research, industry are often invited to lots of events, knowledge transfer events, and so on. So there are additional benefits to it. In regard to IP agreements are based on the National IP Protocol. And I think Connor mentioned something already. It tends to be owned by the public body when the funding is not 100% industry funding, and this is part of the National IP Protocol. There is very little we as higher education institutes can do about this. This is, government has decided this, and so this is something that we have to implement. But there are some certain ways of going about it and so on. I would say if you want to do something that you definitely want to own 100%, for example, then as Connor mentioned, 100% funded project is probably the right way, and the SFI centers do that as well. If you are looking for higher risk stuff, then I think a shared model where, if it works out well, you might have to buy out the IP at the end, but at least you had a lot less risk up front in terms of funding a particular development. Okay, then there's two quite interesting additional programs. There's the SFI Spokes program, which is an opportunity to add additional industry-focused research to an SFI center. So, for example, if you had an interest in a particular topic, but you couldn't identify an SFI center that covers that, then you could approach one that you feel is closest to what you would like to do and discuss with them an additional funding that then the SFI center together with yourself can apply to SFI under the Spokes program. And again, there are a number of these spokes around that demonstrate how this can work very well. So I'm personally involved in one called Enable, which is focused on smart cities and communities that links expertise in 3 SFI centers, the Connect Center for Future Networks, the Lero Center for Software Engineering, and the Insight Center for Data Analytics and AI. And so we're bringing researchers from these 3 centers together to solve quite complicated problems with industry, for example. And we have quite a broad partnership there with multinational companies like the likes of Huawei and Intel, but also a lot of small SMEs, for example, including startups that have benefited from this. Another one is an SFI strategic partnership program, which the focus here is creating specific large-scale research programs between one or more universities, IoTs, and one or more companies. They can exist outside SFI centers, so the spokes are always linked to an SFI center. These strategic partnerships are separate. They typically tend to be driven by large companies, so I'm not sure whether that's of interest to an SME, but these options are available. The split is usually, again, 50% industry, 50% SFI public funding, and they tend to be strategic in nature with the aim to develop longer-term collaborations with significant impact for the industry partner. So there are, I don't think there are many around Ireland. I'm aware of one that Chevron did with University College Dublin, for example, in the energy space a number of years ago. And then also mentioned earlier, I believe, the SFI Centers for Research Training. These are PhD training centers that will, over the next number of years, each train about 120 PhD students in 4 cohorts of about 30 students. The first 2 cohorts have been recruited already. The current recruitment round of the centers is ongoing. There's 6 such centers, all focused on ICT. There's one focused on advanced networks, of which I happen to be the director. There's one focused on AI, one on machine learning, one on data science, one on bioinformatics, and one on AR, VR, and future media. I can provide more detail on those, but if you Google SFI Centers for Research Training, I'm sure you will find each one of them has websites. Here, the idea is that industry is involved in order to develop a strong partnership with those Centers for Research Training, because the idea is that the students would go on placement, for example. The industry would provide feedback to the training program the students get. They would participate in placements for students. They may participate in part funding students if that was of interest, engaging in training, maybe delivering part of the training, participating in training. So the idea here is, SFI called it a deep intellectual partnership with industry. So if you are looking for future talent of, you know, kind of people who are highly educated, for example, then that's a good opportunity to get involved, to get your hands on top level future recruits. And then the final one I'd like to talk about is the SFI Industry and also Public Service Fellowship, but more industry focused fellowship program. The purpose of this is to also enhance industry academia collaborations through the funding of collaborative industry academia research projects. The objective here is to do this through the exchange of personnel. So the idea is that researchers from industry may spend some time in academia, or academic researchers can spend some time in industry. SFI will fund the cost of the fellowship, so but salaries only for non-permanent staff. So, for example, if there's somebody in your organization who would benefit from maybe spending some time in academia to learn, to see what academics are doing, to bring this learning back into your company, then SFI would fund the mobility and some aspects of this, not the salary, but the mobility of the person. And the same, well, if I wanted to go into industry, they would fund not my salary, that would continue to be paid by UCC, but all the other costs involved in spending some time in industry. The salary is covered for non-permanent academic staff, for example, so for postdocs, for example, who want to spend some time in industry. It's an excellent mechanism for companies to bring in people to work for a while, because this is funded by SFI, so there's no cost to the company. For example, there's a hosting cost, of course, to some extent, but some of this is funded also through the SFI grant. But it is a great opportunity for knowledge transfer, to bring in people who might stay with the company, but bring in significant intellectual capability into the company. So that's a kind of a very quick whistle-stop tour of SFI funding for collaboration between academia and industry. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Dirk. That was really valuable. Sometimes when we look at SFI funding, it just seems to be an ocean. And where does one start? We meet a lot of industry personnel, and I suppose Enterprise Ireland is conditioned for the Enterprise Ireland funding models, but SFI has so much to offer. Not only just the funding is worth adding. Dirk, thanks again for your contribution. And this is an opportunity to move on to Dr. Cian O'Murraku. Cian is going to talk to us about the European programme, or European funding. And Cian has been involved in many successful proposals for EU projects from the early stages of development and consortium building to programme execution and closure. Overall, Cian has won over 7 million of competitive funding for Tyndall. More recently, he has been in the coordinating team of the H2020 project TIPS, which looks at thermal management for photonic devices, and is scientific coordinator for the H2020 project InSpecs. Besides engaging with academic and industry collaborators and other research and technology organizations, Keen also participates in EC networking and consultation groups to create technology roadmaps, as for example, the NearID roadmap for nanoelectronics, the Excel strategic research agenda, and the EPOS roadmap document. So a lot of interesting acronyms there, Keen. So I think I'll leave you this moment to explain.
Thank you, Brian. Can you see my full screen now? Or?
Yeah, we sure can. Perfectly.
Great. So as Brian said, I'm based in the Tyndall Institute, and we're a research institute, if you don't know us, in ICT, and we specialize in electronics and photonics. We have over 600 researchers and support staff. We have 130 graduate students, many PhDs and some MScs. And we have 60 researchers in residence. There's a few other numbers there, which you can read. So I just want to talk about, what our track record in Horizon 2020. So Horizon 2020 is the framework program for EU funding.
Sorry to interrupt. Maybe you can put the whole screen because we can actually see the next slide. So sorry. Yeah.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
So in the Horizon 2020 work program finished at the end of 2020. And the next work program is going to be Horizon Europe. So in Horizon 2020, Tyndall have a lot of success. We've had 106 projects funded with a value of nearly 60 million to Tyndall. But in a lot of our projects, we try and include Irish industry. So out of these projects, we've over 20 million went to Irish industry. And 50 million went to other Irish partners, including Nimbus, who are here. And we were involved in 10% of the overall drawdown in Ireland. And it amounts to around 25% of our revenue every year. As I said, we do support industry in Ireland. So in terms of SMEs, which is the focus of this talk, we've supported 23 SMEs have been involved in European projects. There's some logos of the different partners, our industry partners that we've worked with. And we've been told by our partners that EU programs have directly funded over 80 jobs in industry over the project's lifetime. So I suppose one of the questions that a lot of people ask is, why should we get involved in EU projects? So there's a number of key reasons. The first one is to realize innovation. So how do you finance and strengthen your internal R&D? Getting involved in EU projects is a very, very useful way of doing this. You can access external science and technology experts from other partners in the consortium. You can also access infrastructure and platform technologies, which you may not have been able to access. The second important point is to attract and grow talent. A lot of people would know that it's getting increasingly difficult to get talent and to find the right people for jobs. So this gives you access to people across all the career stages, from PhD students all the way up. And it also gives you an opportunity to develop in-house expertise and to upskill your existing staff. And the third reason would be to commercialize your innovation. So their EU projects are useful ways of financing commercialization activities. They're a useful way to advertise your products and services through building demonstrators. And we, as part of the projects, we also quite often would have to present at events and exhibitions, and this is a useful way of marketing your products. And of course, it's a really good way of developing an international network across the full supply chain. So I'm just going to talk quickly about 4 different funding opportunity schemes for SMEs and give you some examples of how SMEs have worked with Tyndall on these. The first one is on access projects. So these are existing projects, and we're involved in quite a number of these. These are two examples. One is in Enables, which is a network of research institutes across Europe, which have expertise in energy harvesting, energy storage, and micropower management. And it enables, it gives SMEs the opportunity to get free grants to do free research in these areas. And the Cat for Clean Production is a similar type of project, but in this case, it's more to do with advanced production. So, you know, there are open calls for SMEs to apply for 50K grants to do prototype development or process development or upscaling in these programs. And an example of an SME that has availed of this that we've worked with is LV Logics, who are looking for some work to look at power management for sensors that they use to monitor silos. And through Enables, they were able to access platforms and research and technologies to develop their product. And there are other access projects that we're also involved in nanoelectronics and so on. The second one is the EIC Accelerator. Used to be called the SME Instrument in Horizon 2020. For Horizon Europe, it's called the EIC Accelerator. These are projects which involve usually just a single applicant, so an SME can apply for these grants. The budget can be up to 2.5 million. The budget can be split between either a research grant or a scale-up grant and finance. And it usually the technology has to be, you know, greater than TRL 5. So you can see in the graph on the left. So TRL 6 is technology demonstrated in a relevant environment. So it's kind of high TRL development. One of the companies that we worked with in the SME Instrument last year or the year before was Medlumix through Saroba. And Medlumix wanted to develop their catheter, which they use to treat atrial fibrillation. So they came to us and we helped them with their submission process, and they were successful in 2019, and they got funding of 2.5 million for that. Now, I suppose just you can see there the success rate's quite low in these, 3 to 4%. So it's quite difficult to get funding, but it's possible. Then in the standard ICT projects, so these are kind of typically you know 6 to 10 partners with a budget of 4 to 6 million and kind of lowish TRL. And these projects are based on the work program, so there are specific topics highlighted in the work program, and you have to write your proposal based around these topics. So I have 2 examples here of ICT projects that we were involved in. So there's the manpower one, which is we were developing a leadless pacemaker that's implanted into the heart and powered by the heart using piezoelectrics. And that was a €6 million project. And then TIPS is another a project on thermal management strategies for photonics. We were looking at microfluidics and thermoelectrics to cool lasers. And in both of these projects, we had an Irish SME called Communicraft involved, and Communicraft were responsible for dissemination and communication activities within the projects. So the new Horizon Europe work program is just out, or there's a draft of it out, and it has a list of a couple of 100 different topics which might be attractive for you. And then the last one I want to talk about is joint partnerships. So these are there's about 30, 35, 40 joint partnerships across Europe in different areas. The one that we work in a lot is the Excel one, which is now called Key Digital Technologies. And these are partnerships between the private and public sectors. This one is for electronics components and systems, but there's other ones for medical and there's agri and photonics. And these are part funded by the national agencies, so either EI or IDA, and part funded by the EU. They're typically very large projects, 40 to 60 partners. These are two examples of projects that have just been funded. They haven't started yet, but these both came out of unsuccessful DTIF proposals that we worked on. And the first one is we were working with a company from Kerry called NetFasa, who develop sensors for container monitoring, for tracking containers and condition monitoring. And they wanted to extend the battery life from currently about a year and a half up to 10 years. So we brought our power management IC expertise and teamed up with them to take part in this proposal. And this is one of the use cases. There are about 6 use cases on energy across this proposal. The second one is another unsuccessful DTIF proposal on cobots in factories. And this was, we were working with Analog Devices and also MDALO, who are an AI company based up in Shannon. This was another success from last year. So, I suppose, despite the fact that they were both unsuccessful DTIF proposals, we managed to repurpose them for other funding schemes. And at the moment, we're looking for an Irish SME involved in the agri-tech industry, because we're working with an agri-tech on an agri-tech project. We're involved in a consortium that we're looking to submit at the end of this year. So if there are any agri-tech companies out there that are interested in getting involved with this, please contact me. I suppose these are just some set testimonials from SMEs that we've worked with. One of the things to mention when you're looking at EU funding is, you should be prepared for long lead times, because typically, from the concept to the funding approved, and then for the project to start could be, a year and a half or so. So it can take a while, but they're a great way of broadening your network and reaching out to other potential customers. So even if the project isn't successful, quite often the contacts you've made and the ideas that you've come up with can work with in other areas as well. So yeah, that was a quick whistle-stop tour through the EU funding area. So if you're interested at all in getting involved in EU funding, my door is open, and you can contact me if you want to discuss any potential ideas that you have, or any problems or needs that you would have, and you want to solve, and maybe we can try and find an appropriate EU proposal for you to get involved in.
Keane, that was marvelous. Thanks very much for that. I suppose Horizon Europe